Today, I'm going to be talking about the final series that I read in 2025, which was actually a duology. This is the Theft of Sunlight duology. It is in the Dauntless Path franchise book series by Intisar Khanani, and I was hoping to release this before 2025 ended, but I had my end of 2025 videos that I felt like I had to make, so we're finally getting it in 2026. But anyway, back to the books. So the Dauntless Path series specifically began with Thorn, a standalone, and this was actually my favorite book of 2024. So when I found out about the companion duology, I picked it up. So with all that out of the way, let's get into this. So in case you're wondering how exactly this duology connects, with Thorn, it happens afterwards, but specifically our main character from Thorn, Alira, is not the point of view character. We are now following Ray. She lives in the kingdom that Alira's betrothed Kestrin is prince of, and we get to see a little bit more of this. Alira is still prominent throughout the series. Specifically, the beginning is like Ray deciding to go to the palace so she can become a lady-in-waiting and maybe find a way to like get help for the kingdom, specifically after I believe her friend's little sister was captured by, like, as many other children have been getting captured. She goes there in hopes that she can like become a little bit of an influence. So what I really love about the duology and this franchise in general is the writing style. There are many times when I was reading Theft of Sunlight or Darkness at the Door, which is the second part of this duology, when I was just reading it, I was like, I feel at home, probably because Thorn was my favorite book of 2024. So getting back into Khanani's writing style, which is very descriptive, but also beautiful, simple to get into. I can imagine everything well and also feel what everything is going through. So the writing style made me feel back at home, which I love. I think also the world of the story is really interesting. I read a little bit of interviews with Intisar Khanani, and she mentioned that there wasn't like a direct location that was like meant to be Manaya, which is where the story takes place, but it is a little bit more non-Western. I believe she talked about how she's lived in the Middle East, and I think a lot of young adult books and just fantasy novels in general focus more on like Western European countries, so having something that's more Middle Eastern-esque is really neat. I also think that the stakes are demonstrated beautifully throughout both Thorn and then Theft of Sunlight. I would say one of the big questions that like Thorn presents is this whole, what is it better to be safe or is it better to take a risk if it means like other people can be safe? And I think Theft of Sunlight emphasizes that a little bit more, specifically because with Ray, she's not a princess, and she doesn't have like this magical threat. Specifically, the plot with Thorn is Alira's identity was stolen from an evil sorceress, so that made it hard for her like stand up. But then with Ray, she's not going to be attacked by magic, but she is from the lower. She's poor, or at the start of the story. Well, you're not necessarily poor, but she's not a princess or a royal, and especially like in the middle chunk of the duology, we really get to see like what's happening because she decided like, I have to stand up, I have to go out. So, and I think when you really understand the stakes of a story, that helps it out, and you really want to root for the characters and you want them to succeed. So going back to this being a companion duology, I think it does a good job at specifically incorporating itself into Thorn without while it still feels like its own thing, I believe you can read this without reading Thorn, but I would definitely recommend reading Thorn because you get more backstory specifically with Alira's family, and you get more of the world. And also, I do think Thorn is the superior piece, so I would definitely say read Thorn before you get into the Path of Sunlight duology. But I do think that it does hold up on its own as a duology. And I like how we do get to see a little bit of Alira, specifically like what's happening with her as she's adjusting to her new life, and we get to see her finally stand up a little bit for herself, especially when we see like where she was at the start of her story. We get to see how she is now after going through her adventure and now living in this new kingdom in the position she was always meant to be in. However, as much as I enjoyed this duology, as I said earlier, it's not as good as Thorn, so let's get into what I didn't love about this. So I think my main critique is this kind of had a 2-in-1 story effect a little bit. It always felt like this is meant to be read as one longer book rather than 2 shorter books, so Path of Sunlight can be a little bit slow at times. There's a lot of the build up, and then Darkness at the end of at the door is basically when a lot of the action happens, everything is being closed up. So what happened a little bit for me was it felt like Path of Sunlight is all the build up, then the action here. So I don't know if Path of Sunlight reads as well on its own story without Darkness at the door, which admittedly a duology is meant to feel complete. One should be they should be together, but at the same time, I think even if a story is meant to be one part of a series, it needs to stand on its own. It kind of has a little bit of a, when they take a book and then release it in like 2 parts, sort of like with Harry Potter or the Hunger Games. So the first part isn't amazing. It's really just like a lot of the build up, and ultimately if you think of it, not a lot happens, and it's hard to like appreciate it as its own. But then like Act 2 happens, and that's when all of the exciting good stuff happens. There's a part of me that almost wishes that a couple 100 pages were like skimmed off of both of these, and then they were released as like one longer novel. I mean, it maybe would have been a little harder to read, but I think it would have helped Theft of Sunlight at the end of the day if it was just one longer book rather than 2 shorter books with a lot of build up before a lot of payoff. Something else is I didn't love our main character, Ray. I feel like I didn't dislike her, but maybe I'm just biased here because Alira, I really latched onto her. She was a character who had gone through a lot at the beginning of her story, even before the magic happened, specifically like with her abusive family and her dead father. And when she's being sent away, she's like, well, it can get better, but I'm not sure. So then she loses everything at the beginning of that story pretty early on, and we see how she's managing with it, and throughout it she does remain kind-hearted, and at the end she ultimately learns like stand up for herself. And unfortunately, I feel like Ray, especially in the first book, I didn't latch onto her as well. I think she does get better in the second book, but probably, as I said, this is because this is a lot of the payoff. And also, I think there were almost too many characters, which really was one of the few nitpicks I had with Thorn. Maybe 1 or 2 too many characters, but I feel like that issue was a little bit highlighted with this. So there were times when I was reading and was like, wait, who are you again? Were you in this group or were you in this group? So yeah, I think those are my 2 main critiques. Too many characters, a main character I didn't fall in love with, I wasn't as attached to compared to earlier, and the 2 books not being able to stand up on its own as well unless they're together. Weirdly though, even if I felt like there may have been a few too many characters in the series, something else I really liked about it was weirdly the main characters' connections with one another. Even if Rey wasn't one of my favorite protagonists that I've read this year, I really felt for like her bond with her family. We see how motivated her family is, how big of a motivation her family is for her throughout the series. And it was like a really beautiful bond with Alira as like one of her handmaidens. And then similarly, like with her love story, specifically in the second book, we get to see how much she cares for her love interest. Bren, that was his name. Sorry, a lot has happened, okay? But I think especially in the sequel, I really loved getting to see them connect, and we see how much she grows fond of him, even if it's a little bit of an enemies to lovers situation. And I don't even know if he liked her that much at the beginning, but by the end of it, I was really rooting for these two to get together, and when they were finally together at the end, I was happy for them. So those are all my thoughts for the Theft of Sunlight duology. As I said earlier, it's definitely not as good as the original book Thorn, but I'd say if you've read Thorn and you really enjoy it, definitely check out Theft of Sunlight. I think it's a very satisfying companion to Thorn, and if you want more of this writing style and these themes explored, Theft of Sunlight will ultimately leave you satisfied. If you enjoyed this, please share it with your friends. I'm Louisa Hammond, and I'll see you next time.